Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Welcome sa isa na namang episode ng PNU Talks online series ni Inang Pamantasan kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hangganan. Ito po ang inyong lingkod, Ginang Jen Ann Rosal, Education Program Supervisor ng Department of Education, Division of Silay City, Negros Occidental. A graduate of Philippine Normal University, Visayas, Batch 2007. Ako po ang inyong home learning buddy today. Samahan niyo po akong pag-aralan ang isa na namang mahalagang paraan ng pagkatuto na pinamagatang Inclusive Education Policy Framework for Basic Education in the Philippines. I-type lamang po ang inyong mga kuro-kuro o katanungan sa ating comment section at huwag kalimutang i-like o pusuan at i-share ang episode na ito. As the education system transitions into the new normal, the Department of Education assures that there are various initiatives to help ensure that children with special needs would be able to continue their education. With a pandemic posing unprecedented challenges, both to government and private educational authorities and systems, as well as to learners and parents, this topic highlights policy framework of inclusive education in the Philippines. The new school year has started under drastically different circumstances, same as last year, than we have known in our lifetime. Blended learning is still being deployed as a solution to the ongoing impact of the pandemic globally. We have seen educators quickly adapting to new ways of delivering lessons and feedback, as well as grading students' academic performance in distance learning and virtual environments. Now, I will be sharing to you the Inclusive Education Policy Framework for Basic Education in the Philippines. We will be starting with a question: what is inclusive education? And what comes into your mind when we say inclusive education? So today, we will be talking about the rationale, the legal basis, the scope, the definition of terms, the policy statement, the guiding principles, the key dimensions, and the monitoring and evaluation of inclusive education. So what is inclusive education? Inclusive education is a process of strengthening the capacity of the education system to reach out to all learners and can thus be understood as a key strategy to achieve education for all. So this is in accordance to UNESCO policy guidelines on inclusion in education. So when we say education for all, there's a movement that is a commitment to provide quality and basic education for all children, youth, and adults. So inclusive education is also a new approach towards educating the children with diverse abilities and learning difficulties with that of normal ones within the same manner. And it seeks to address the learning needs of all the children with a specific focus on those who are vulnerable to marginalization and exclusion. Another definition of inclusive education is it recognizes inclusive schools as the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcome communities, building an inclusive society, and achieving education for all. So this is in accordance with UNESCO policy guidelines on inclusive in education. Inclusive education is when all students, regardless of any challenges they may have, are placed in age-appropriate general education classes that are in their own neighborhood schools to receive high-quality instruction, interventions, and supports that enable them to meet success in the core curriculum. And the driving principle is that to make all learners feel welcomed, appropriately challenged, and supported in their efforts. Another definition is of IE or inclusive education is that it is a process where all types of learners with diverse needs are given equal opportunities for a meaningful life in non-discriminatory environments. And these environments that we are talking about foster belongingness through culturally, spiritually sensitive, learner-centered curriculum, learning processes, delivery modes, and settings. A successful inclusive education happens primarily through accepting, understanding, and attending to learners' differences and diversity, which can include physical, cognitive, academic, social, and emotional. And the working definition of inclusive education is recognizing a unique Filipino, respecting kapwa or the unity of the one of us and the other, and spiritual beliefs, and in fostering love for God, humanity, environment, and the nation. So when we say again inclusion, another is it is a fundamental right of a Filipino learner. It is not a privilege for a selected few. So what is the rationale of inclusive education policy framework? So it provides an overall framework for programs implementation that directly promote inclusive education and ensuring that every aspect of the K-12 curriculum support system is responsive to the needs and demands of diverse learners. Okay, so the rationale explains that education should be learner-oriented and responsive to the needs, cognitive and cultural capacity, the circumstances and diversity of learners, schools, and communities. So we come now to the legal basis or the Philippine legal mandate that supports inclusive education in the Philippines. So the 1987 Constitution, Article 14, Section 1 states that explicitly upholds the protection and promotion of the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels, and that Section 2 necessitates the Philippine government to establish, maintain, and support a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education relevant to the needs of the people and society, and encourage non-formal, informal, and indigenous learning systems, as well as self-learning, independent, and out-of-school study programs, particularly those that respond to community needs. So the legal basis or the Article 14 of the Philippine Constitution stipulates that it shall protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. So this means to say that children and youth with special needs, including those who are gifted with advanced knowledge and skills on one hand, and the physically and mentally impaired and handicapped persons on the other. They need education and training different from those given to ordinary or normal children. They need special programs that would further enhance their unusual mental and physical capacities to make this beneficial to them and to their family and community. Another legal basis in Section 2.5 of the Article 14 of the Philippine Constitution provides that adult citizens, the disabled, and out-of-school youth with training in civics, vocational efficiency, and other skills. So we have the alternative learning system that caters to out-of-school youth. It is a parallel learning system in the Philippines that provides a practical option to the existing formal instruction. So when one does not have or cannot access formal education in schools, alternative learning system is an alternate or substitute. So alternative learning system includes both the non-formal and informal sources of knowledge and skills. So as we can see, many Filipinos do not have a chance to attend and finish formal basic education due to many reasons. Some drop out from schools, while some do not have schools in their communities. Since every Filipino has a right to free basic education, the government established the alternative learning system to have access to and complete basic education in a mode that fits their distinct situations and needs. So what is the basis of establishment of alternative learning system? So the 1987 Philippine Constitution provides for the recognition and promotion of other forms of education other than the formal education. And it states in Article 14, Section 2, Paragraph 1, declares that the state shall establish, maintain, and support a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education relevant to the needs of the people and society. And Paragraph 4 concisely encourages non-formal, informal, and indigenous learning systems as well as self-learning, independent, and out-of-school study programs, particularly those that respond to community needs. Another legal mandate or the basis of inclusive education is the Governance Act for Basic Education, otherwise known as the Republic Act 9155, that stipulates the establishment of the alternative learning system to provide out-of-school children, youth, and adults population with basic education. So if we are going to define formal education system and non-formal education, formal education system is classroom-based, managed by trained formal school teachers, while else non-formal education happens outside the classroom, community-based, usually conducted at community learning centers, barangay multipurpose hall, libraries, or at home, managed by else learning facilitators such as mobile teachers, district ALS coordinators, instructional managers at an agreed schedule and venue between the learners and facilitators. Another mandate is Republic Act number 10533, otherwise known as Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013. Section 5 prioritizes the inclusive of enhanced basic education through the implementation of programs designed to address the physical, intellectual, psychological, and cultural needs of learners. So Republic Act 10157, or the Kindergarten Education Act, promotes the holistic development of the child. That essentially means the development of their intellectual, mental, physical, emotional, and social abilities in a child so that he or she is capable of facing the demands and challenges of everyday life. So these abilities are vitally important for success in professional fields of work. Another legal basis that supports inclusive education in the Philippines is Republic Act number 9155, otherwise known as the Governance of Basic Education Act of 2001, that enforces the establishment of the alternative learning system to provide out-of-school children, youth, and adults population with basic education. So again, ALS, or Alternative Learning System, is a parallel learning system in the Philippines that provides a practical option to the existing formal instruction. When one does not have or cannot access formal education in schools, alternative learning system is an alternate or substitute, and it includes both the non-formal and informal sources of knowledge and skills. Okay, so through Republic Act 9442, or otherwise known as the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons, it provides educational assistance to persons with disability for them to pursue primary, secondary, tertiary, post-tertiary, as well as vocational or technical education in both public and private schools through the provision of scholarships, grants, financial aid, subsidies, and other incentives to qualified persons with disability, including support for books, braille books, learning materials, and uniform allowance to the extent feasible, provided that persons with disability shall meet minimum admission requirements. Another legal basis is Republic Act number 10665, or an act establishing the open high school system in the Philippines and appropriating funds therefore. So this act declares the policy of the state to broaden access to relevant quality education through the employment of an alternative secondary education program to overcome personal, geographical, and socioeconomic and physical constraints to encourage them to complete secondary education. So President Benigno Aquino III signed a law, and this is Republic Act number 10665, or the Open High School System, that seeks to provide more learners access to secondary education through the open learning modality. Another legal basis is the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, which upholds the right of children, changed the way children are viewed and treated. And Article 2 states non-discriminatory regardless of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, property, disability, and birth. Next is Article 23. Disabled children's education. Ensure disabled children have access to education while recognizing their need for special care and assistance. And Article 28 and 29 states that The right to quality education develop the child's personality, talents, mental and physical abilities, develop respect for the child's own cultural and national values. Another legal basis or the international legal mandate is Education 2030 Framework for Action, which aims at mobilizing all countries and partners around a sustainable development goal on inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all. Another international legal mandate that supports inclusive education is the 1994 Salamanca Statement, which provides that all children should learn together wherever possible, regardless of any difficulties or differences they may have. The sustainable development aims at eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, combating inequality within and among countries, preserving the planet, creating sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, and fostering social inclusion. This is in accordance to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the Sustainable Development Goal provides that a quality education is the one that focuses on the whole child, the holistic growth of the child that includes his or her social, emotional, mental, physical, and cognitive development of each student, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, socio-economic status, or geographic location, wherein it prepares the child for life, not just for testing. So we have now the guiding principles of inclusive education. Number one is equal and equitable access to quality basic education. So equal and equitable access to quality basic education is one of the guiding principles of inclusive education, wherein we provide resources and direct policy to ensure that each child enters school healthy and learns about and practices a healthy lifestyle, learns in an environment that is physically and emotionally safe for students and adults, is actively engaged in learning and is connected to the school and broader community. He or she has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified, caring adults, and is challenged academically and prepared for success in college or further study and for employment and participation in global environment. So a quality education provides also the outcomes needed for individuals, communities, and societies to prosper. It allows schools to align and integrate fully their communities and access a range of services across sectors designed to support the educational development of their students. A quality education is supported by three key pillars. So what are they? Number one, ensuring access to quality teachers, providing use of quality learning tools and professional development, and the establishment of safe and supportive quality learning environments. So the second guiding principle of inclusive education is responsiveness to rights. A human rights-based approach is about empowering people to know and claim their rights and increasing the ability and accountability of individuals and institutions who are responsible for respecting, protecting, and fulfilling rights. So this means that we give people greater opportunities to participate in shaping the decisions that impact on their human rights. It also means increasing the ability of those with responsibility for fulfilling rights to recognize and know how to respect those rights and make sure they can be held to account. And realizes commitment, quality, equitable, culture-based, and complete basic education. So this means that it is about ensuring that both the standards and the principles of human rights are integrated into policy making as well as to the day-to-day running of organizations. The third guiding principle of inclusive education is sensitivity and responsiveness to context. So inclusive education institutionalizes the form of programs that is sensitive and responsive to the learner's context. So when we say responsive to the learner's context, it promotes institutional sensitivity and responsiveness in its nature, situations, and realities of the learners. And it can be realized through learner-centered programs and context-responsive programs. And at the same time, in recognizing and valuing diversity of learners, schools, and communities is given importance. The fourth guiding principle of inclusive education is inclusion. Inclusion means It recognizes and respects the right of learners to an education that is relevant and responsive to their respective contexts. So it means that we recognize and respect learners' rights to relevant and responsive to their context. And that means also that no learner is left behind. The fifth guiding principle is non-discriminatory and child-friendly learning environment. The organizational culture and philosophy, classrooms and learning facilities shall be conducive, child-friendly, and appropriate for all types of learners, as well as adhere to planning standards suited to the locality. So when we say the non-discriminatory and child-friendly learning environment, this means that all learners shall have equal and equitable access to appropriate and relevant equipment, facilities, learning resources, and information. And learning materials shall be free from any discriminatory contents, sensitive to social and cultural contexts, and appropriate to diverse learners. So that's why that we do quality assured learning materials in order for us to see to it that it is free from any discriminatory context, that is sensitive to social and cultural context, and of course should be appropriate to diverse learners. We have the following key dimensions of inclusive education. The first dimension is the learners. So the learners' participation shall be maximized in the whole process of curriculum development. The most important key dimension is the learner, wherein curriculum development, implementation, and delivery, and in school planning, monitoring, and evaluation. The learner is one of the key dimensions of inclusive education, should have programs responsive to the diverse context of learners, and learners' participation and representation must be given importance. The second key dimension of inclusive education is the K-12 curriculum. So inclusion is the key standard and principle of the K-12 curriculum that features learner-centered, developmentally appropriate, culture-sensitive, relevant, gender-sensitive, and contextualized. And the perspective of inclusive education is at the core of the K-12 curriculum that is embedded in the curriculum framework itself. So the K-12 curriculum include the standards-based curriculum designed to be flexible enough for schools and local communities to contextualize in relation to the learner's socio-cultural background, historical context, and biogeographical realities. So the inclusiveness of the K-12 curriculum is also expressed through existing inclusion program. So we have existing inclusion programs such as special education, indigenous peoples education, madrasa education, alternative learning system, and flexible learning options, which address the context and needs of particular learners. And special interest programs also cater to learners who manifest the interest and aptitudes for particular skill sets. The K-12 curriculum also strengthened and continued to pursue the following. First, recognition and development of programs or initiatives to address the context, needs, and concerns not covered by existing programs and initiatives of DepEd. And second, contextualization of the curriculum and learning materials at the school level. Next, differentiated presentation of information, content, and learning materials to support understanding, provision for learners' options to create, learn and share what they know in both curricular and non-curricular activities, and provision of equal learning opportunities for all learners to facilitate active participation in the teaching learning process. So this means to say that the K-12 curriculum should have inclusion as a key standard and principle with SPED, madrasa education, indigenous people education, special interest programs, the flexible learning options, and the alternative learning system. It can be given through quality differentiated instructions through number one, contextualization of curriculum and learning materials, equal opportunities for active participation in the teaching learning process, and of course, provision of options to create, learn, and share what they know and what they can do in both curricular and non-curricular activities. The next key dimension is the development of learning resources. So as of now, we are adapting the printed modular learning modality and other learning delivery modality. And so we have the development of learning materials. Both teaching and learning materials shall be developed and produced at the school level and shall be maximized to complement those instructional materials provided by the department and external partners and stakeholders. And quality assurance is a process that will ensure that learning resources produced are free from any discriminatory content, are appropriate to diverse learners, and are sensitive to social and cultural contexts. So the community, our community as a learning resource shall also be developed and maximized. And the learning resource portal, or as a repository of learning and teaching resources, shall be utilized and maximized. So we have locally developed and contextualized learning resources published in the DepEd portal, the LRMDS portal. We have varied contexts in learning materials. Learners' knowledge, learning styles, multiple intelligences, and interests are given importance. And learning materials are sensitive to social and cultural contexts with the community as a learning resource. The next key dimension is the learning delivery. So the delivery of educational program and services should be made flexible based on the profile, need, and context of the learners. And schools are encouraged to offer different educational delivery programs that shall serve as a menu of options for different types of learners to ensure that no learner is left behind. So the school, serving as a one-stop shop, shall ensure the following. Number one, undertaking anticipatory and proactive initiatives in a coherent manner geared towards gaining a better understanding of the learner's context and needs. It recognizes barriers to inclusion and planning for programs and services that adheres to the principles of universal design for learning. Develop school policies, mechanisms, and strategies for delivering equal and equitable opportunities for diverse learners, and involvement of the learners as primary stakeholders in identifying and addressing learning gaps of disadvantaged and marginalized learners. So that means to say that as one of the key dimensions, the learning delivery should be flexible. Optional programs for different types of learners should be based on context, background, needs, and interest. The next key dimension is educational assessment. So the K-12 curriculum and curriculum contextualization necessitates that learning assessment be also inclusive of the particularities of the learners. So this means to say that classroom assessment shall be flexible through the use of varied assessment strategies and methods and tools and equipment. So educational assessment as one of the key dimensions of inclusive education should recognize particularities of learners. So it has two types, the formative evaluation and the evaluative assessment. And it can also be categorized into traditional and non-traditional, and authentic assessment should also be given importance. So we have the next key dimension, which is very important, the learning environment. So inclusive learning environment are designed to support and complement the implementation and delivery of an inclusive curriculum. So the learning environment should facilitate learning, reinforce an effective teaching learning environment, and adhere to existing policies that protect the rights of the learner. So this means to say that the physical environment shall consider the uniqueness of the learners and how they learn in its design, and it shall ensure safety of learners and accessibility of functional support facilities such as, but not limited to, water and sanitation facilities, clinic, library, guidance office, and community learning centers. And the educational setting shall promote harmonious relationship, respect for diversity, and practice of positive discipline among learners, teachers, parents, and administrators. So the learning environment, as one of the key dimensions of inclusive education, should support and complement learning delivery, and it shall also facilitate learning and reinforce effective teaching learning that protects learners' rights. Another key dimension is teacher professional development. So all teachers are primary implementers of inclusive education, and as such, they shall possess the proper values, perspectives, attitudes, as well as competencies that communicate and reflect inclusion as they address the educational needs of diverse learners. So the competencies of teachers shall be continuously enhanced as part of their professional development so that they can create an inclusive learning environment that promotes inclusion of all learners and facilitate teaching and learning processes that addresses diverse learning styles and needs. So we have the conduct of trainings and seminars to teachers to enhance and to improve their professional development. So the Department of Education shall collaborate with the Commission on Higher Education or CHED through the Teacher Education Council or TEC to ensure that the integration of inclusive education in all major courses in the teacher education programs are given importance. And participation of stakeholders, especially those directly involved in the teaching learning process, shall be encouraged. They shall likewise be engaged through periodic consultations to further strengthen the implementation of inclusive education. So that means to say, teacher professional development as one of the key dimensions. It states that all teachers are implementers of inclusive education and through continuous capacity development based on the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, inclusive education is part of the teacher education programs and stakeholders' involvement in the teaching learning process shall be encouraged. The next key dimension is school leadership and management. So all schools shall be guided by the perspective of inclusive education in contextualizing and implementing the K-12 curriculum and are encouraged to implement inclusion and interest programs as needed to respond to the context of the learners and the communities being served. So all school heads, all school administrators, all school principals shall be capacitated to prepare and manage schools that are ready to implement inclusive education. School-based management shall be considered and be strengthened the implementation of inclusive education, which shall be duly reflected in the school improvement plan of schools. So school heads, this means to say that as part of school leadership and management, school heads shall facilitate the provision of technical support and should be actively engaged in the teaching and non-teaching personnel in an atmosphere of continuous capacity building. So our school head shall support the development of research-based instruction and school management of inclusive education. Practices and innovation shall be properly documented for sharing, replication, and for continuous improvement. So school leadership and management as one of the key dimensions promotes inclusive education as a perspective and policy that will guide schools in the implementation of the school improvement plan and will encourage practices and innovations. Another key dimension is partnership for inclusive education. So the department at all levels of governance shall continuously conduct intensive advocacy and social mobilization on inclusive education as a perspective, policy, and practice. Continuous engagement with the stakeholders and partners shall be institutionalized in the planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of curricular and co-curricular programs and activities to ensure quality implementation of inclusive education. External linkages and partnership must be expanded and strengthened to ensure proper coordination, resource sharing, and sustainability of inclusive education implementation. So, partnership as one of the key dimensions of inclusive education promotes advocacy and social mobilization that institutionalize engagement of stakeholders and partners and expand and strengthen linkages and partnerships. The last key dimension of inclusive education is the governance support. So the department shall adequately consider the specific needs of inclusive education in the planning and programming of resources such as provision of program funds, allocation of teacher items, resources for adequate learning facilities and equipment needed, and support the professional development of personnel. The department shall continuously coordinate with the local government units to maximize the utilization of the Special Education Fund and other available local resources. The involvement of internal and external stakeholders shall also be encouraged to support the implementation of inclusion programs. As the last key dimension, which is the government support, inclusive education should be given importance in planning and programming that is responsive to the planning standards in the diversity of learners, and should coordinate with the local government units in the maximization use of Special Education Fund and other resources. Before I end my presentation, allow me to share to you this quote from Morvia Gooden. Inclusive leadership is about recognizing and valuing diversity or difference, and valuing people, recognizing them for their skills, experience, and talent, and treating them equally and fairly, irrespective of their ethnic background, gender, age, sexual orientation, religion, belief, or of any disability they may have. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig. Sa muli, ito po si Ginang Jen Anvilla Rosal at sumasa inyo ang PNU Talks. Naway pagpalain po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.